the Rabbi of Lubavitch. And so history repeated itself, and a great and binding friendship grew up between the new Binyamin and the new Wolf. Lubavitch followed with interest the friendship of Wolf and Binyamin. Both boys studied together and were brought up together. Both showed themselves to be very gifted, and both were very studious. The whole town spoke with pride about them and their abilities. When the two boys grew up and could show something for their years of study, Tzvi Aryeh took them to the Rabbi of Lubavitch, Rabbi Shalom Shlomo, to examine them. The Rav praised them very highly and passed them on to his son, Rabbi Yosef the Ilui, asking him to be their teacher. Shortly afterwards, Rabbi Shalom Shlomo passed away, and his son Rabbi Yosef succeeded him in his rabbinical post. The boys continued to study under the direction of Rabbi Yosef and made excellent progress. Apart from his Talmudic studies, Binyamin excelled as a musician. He not only sang beautifully, but played the violin most enchantingly. Everybody listened open-mouthed to his singing and playing, and he thrilled them all with the sweetness of his music. They had never heard anything like it. For 4 years, the two boys, Binyamin and Wolf, studied under the Rav of Lubavitch, Rabbi Yosef. They were already grown up, and it was time to consider the question of marriage. Tzvi Aryeh and Leah Breiner were doubly interested in the matter. Regarding Wolf, they were ready to agree to a union between him and their daughter Sarah. When the wedding eventually took place, all Lubavitch joined the happy parents in a great celebration. Everybody in Lubavitch, from great to small, attended the wedding, which was made most enjoyable to all by the violin playing of Binyamin, the bosom friend of the bridegroom and brother of the bride. An unexpected guest at the wedding was one of the nobles of the district, who came especially to hear Binyamin sing and play. He had heard of Binyamin's accomplishments and wanted to hear for himself whether he was indeed as great a musician as was claimed. The fact that this nobleman later sent a special rider on horseback to bring Binyamin to sing and play at his next party proved how impressed he was with Binyamin's musical abilities. Binyamin went along with a few fellow musicians of about his own age, and they played and sang for the gathering of nobles and men of high rank present at the banquet. One of the guests, having had more than was good for him in the way of liquid refreshment, thought he would have a joke on Binyamin's account. He demanded that Binyamin dress himself in the skin of an animal and stand on an overturned barrel and thus play the violin. It was not enough for him that Binyamin and his companions were entertaining the guests so beautifully with their singing and playing. No, he had to have them look ridiculous to complete the amusement. The other noble guests were also somewhat drunk and agreed it would be a good idea. Binyamin, poor fellow, was compelled to carry out their crazy suggestion. It is easy to imagine how this gifted and sensitive young man felt. He could see how little he and his fellow Jews could expect from the overlords in spite of all they did to please them. But this was not the worst. The merrymaking at the squire's estate went on for several days and nights, and the Jewish musicians had to continue their entertainment. The assembled nobility continually thought of new forms of entertainment. It struck one of them that they could have many more laughs at Binyamin's expense. A large barrel was filled with water, and Binyamin was ordered to get into it and sing and play while floating inside it. Binyamin had the greatest difficulty in keeping his head above the water while he sang and played. It was a terrible ordeal for him and fraught with danger. All this while, Binyamin had to pretend that he too thought it was all a grand joke, and that he was enjoying this devilish game as much as they. Binyamin's feelings had been quite outraged. The noble, who was the host at this banquet, attempted to compensate and show recognition of Binyamin's talent by presenting him with a brick-built house as a wedding present when he got married some time later. After his marriage, Binyamin continued with his Talmudic studies, still under the guidance of Rabbi Yosef, being supported by his father, Tzvi Aryeh. Rabbi Yosef had begun to show an inclination towards going away from time to time to live in a self-imposed exile. He used to go away for periods of 6 months or so, and then return to his rabbinical occupation in Lubavitch. During his absence, he used to leave his pupil Binyamin to fill his place. Thus passed 10 years. Rabbi Binyamin, still supported by his father, continued to devote himself to the study of Torah and the service of God. The time came, however, when Tzvi Aryeh died, and Rabbi Binyamin was left without financial support. It was then about the year 5496, 1736, that the Rav of Lubavitch, Rabbi Yosef, called together the heads of the community and said to them, "Until now, when I used to go into exile for several months, I myself used to appoint my pupil Rabbi Binyamin to carry on in my place, but now I intend to go away for not less than 2 years. It would not be right, therefore, for me alone to make the appointment this time. I want you to do so." The heads of the community all agreed that Rabbi Binyamin was certainly worthy of being the Rav of Lubavitch. Before Rabbi Yosef left Lubavitch, he asked Rabbi Binyamin to promise him that during his absence he would, out of his salary, make an allowance to his wife and little daughter. Rabbi Binyamin readily consented, and so Rabbi Yosef could depart into a self-chosen exile with a light heart. 2 years later, Rabbi Yosef returned home, but did not want his rabbinical position restored to him. He said that Rabbi Binyamin had a greater right to it than he, particularly as the community was so highly satisfied with their new Rav. What then should be done about Rabbi Yosef? It was unanimously decided that the best solution for all concerned would be to appoint Rabbi Yosef as their Maggid and leader of the community. Rabbi Yosef now showed his ability in his new role as Maggid. He showed an originality in his approach, which no other Maggid of the period had attempted. Many used to come to Lubavitch from all parts of the country. They all preached in the Beis Medrash, and their sermons were all of a pattern. They told the listeners that if they sinned against God and did not repent immediately, they would be punished with indescribable tortures in purgatory. It was not unusual for the audience, upon hearing these prophetic warnings and threats, to break into weeping and wailing. The whole atmosphere among the men, as well as the women, was filled with sighs and groans and tears. Not thus was the way of the new Maggid, Rabbi Yosef. He did not pour fire and brimstone upon the sinners. He uttered no curses. He did not speak of purgatory, nor did he threaten them with hellish tortures. Instead, he stressed the glorious reward which awaited all who studied the Torah and carried out God's commandments. He did not want to turn the people to the Torah through fear, but rather by winning over the hearts of the young and old, men, women, and children, through goodness, sincerity, and above all, through understanding. Rabbi Yosef was most anxious to lead everybody to that right path through love and understanding. He used to say that apart from the fact that Jews will be rewarded by the Almighty for their good deeds, they at the same time bring a great feeling of satisfaction to their Creator. This was indeed an entirely new approach. Rabbi Yosef's words completely captured the hearts of the congregation. Again, when Rabbi Yosef spoke about God, the Creator of the universe, he did not speak of a God of vengeance who throws a feeling of terror over mankind, but a God of mercy, a philanthropic God from whom streams love and goodness, and whose sole desire is that man should keep to the right path. God's wish is not that the wicked should die or be punished for their evil doing, but that they should repent and live to enjoy the benefits of God's world. Rabbi Yosef also excelled in the manner in which he interpreted the sayings of our sages and the novel way in which he explained them to his hearers. He extracted from them the very deepest and most beautiful thoughts and ideas. Above all, he awakened in his audience a great love of God. He used to say that love and fear of God are the foundations of Judaism, but that love always rates higher than fear. The love of God and fear of God are two equal precepts, he preached, but nevertheless, the love of God comes first. It is written, and you shall love the Lord your God, and then later the Lord your God shall you fear. Thus, to worship God through love is of a higher order than to worship Him through fear only. The effect which Rabbi Yosef had upon the Jews of Lubavitch through his sermons was extraordinary. He absolutely carried his listeners into a new world. The style and content of his sermons were entirely new and completely different from that of any other Maggid at that time. Rabbi Yosef brought a world of knowledge into his talks, a wealth of learning. In addition, he was gifted with a fluent and appealing power of speech. But this was not all. Rabbi Yosef was not merely satisfied to preach the right way of life, but also lived and practiced it. Now that he had become the Maggid of the congregation, he endeavored to excel himself in the fineness of his character and actions, even more than when he was the Rav. Above all, Rabbi Yosef's love for every Jew of whatever class or station manifested itself in his actions, thereby endearing him to every Jewish inhabitant of Lubavitch. His sermons were always woven through with the golden thread of his love for his people. He always stressed their virtues. Rabbi Yosef showed his love especially for the plain, simple, ordinary Jew, to the worker, to the poor vendor, and to every person who worked and earned an honest living. In these simple folk, Rabbi Yosef saw the true beauty of the Jewish nation and the real depth of the Jewish soul. The popular opinion of the time was that the scholar was a man to whom an elevated position in society was due. Rabbi Yosef, however, sought to modify this idea and to show that the Jew who was sincere in his Jewish beliefs and way of life, even if he was not a man of learning, held an equal place in his heart. No one in Lubavitch knew where Rabbi Yosef had acquired his new ideas and his mode of life and the new approach in his sermons, but it was agreed by all that these innovations had greatly beneficial effect upon the community. Rabbi Yosef had succeeded in bringing new life and a new soul into the hearts and lives of the simple and ordinary folk of Lubavitch who had previously been brushed aside. Rabbi Yosef's influence upon the Jews was felt not only in Lubavitch but also in the surrounding towns and townlets. Leaders of other communities, however, becoming scared of his revolutionary ideas, forbade him to come and preach to their congregations. Rabbi Yosef, nevertheless, was a frequent visitor to such places as Rodnia, Kalishk, Yanovich, Liazna, Dubrovna, Dobromizl, Babanovich, Rozosno, and many more where his influence was greatly felt and appreciated. Rabbi Yosef continued to disappear periodically, and no one knew where he would go. People guessed that he went to live in self-imposed exile, and he had a regular practice of doing this since the time his father was alive. And also, when he was the Rav of Lubavitch, his disappearances excited no comment, and no one bothered to get to the bottom of his secret. It did not occur to anybody that Rabbi Yosef's disappearances had any connection with the new doctrine of Hasidism, which had begun to take root in the Jewish world.